AA6DD, K6YYL.
Yeah, good morning, Kim. K6YYL, AA6DD.
Good morning, Will. I thought we would maybe do a video today and talk about what this means today, being the winter solstice, December 21st, 2017. So what is your take here for radio propagation and all the good news that you're going to tell us? So go ahead, Will. AA6DD, K6YYL.
Okay, very good, Kim. Bootsy Kitty just climbed up on my lap here and is getting all relaxed. Well, Ham should be aware of the solar cycle and its relationship to the Earth, because the amount of ultraviolet light from the sun has a tremendous effect on the ionization of the E layer and the F1 and the F2 and a theoretical F3 layer that is out there as well. And of course, for the northern hemisphere, it has a very succinct pattern, and that is that the days get shorter and shorter as we get into the December the 21st, which is the winter solstice. And then they start getting longer and longer thereafter as the sun doesn't dip quite so low on the southern horizon as it does otherwise. And that means, of course, there will be more ultraviolet over a longer stretch of time. So the upper HF bands will benefit as the MUF, the maximum usable frequency, will get higher and higher and higher. Peaking out sometime in February, when it'll then reverse and start back down. And then on March the 21st, generally speaking, these, let me go through all four of them. You know, there's four basic things that happen each year. We're sitting right here at the winter solstice on December the 21st. But then we have the equinox, two equinoxes that separate spring from winter. The first one, which is March the 21st, like I say, on the calendar it may vary a day. It might be the 20th or and not the 21st, but in general, you can just assume it's the 21st and you're close enough. And so the spring equinox means that the daytime and the nighttime are exactly equal. And after March, then as we go into the spring and then summer, the days get longer and longer and longer until we hit June the 21st, which daytime is the longest we get. And then they start getting shorter and shorter again until we hit the fall equinox, which is around September the 21st. And then the nights take over and the darkness gets deeper and deeper and deeper until right now we're on the deepest of the nighttime and the smallest of the sunshine here on December the 21st. So the MUF, especially the upper HF bands, will be down, and because we're just not getting enough sunlight. And now we'll be crawling out of it slowly. And so over the next few weeks, we'll see the MUF get back up on 15 meters. And sometime by February, when we get some good solar flares and such, we'll even have the EMF pop up to 12 meters. And even on rare occasions, because we're pretty well close to the bottom of the sunspot cycle right now, it'll even come on up on 10 meters, especially for transequatorial. Anyway, any questions on that there, Kim? You can act like you're a neophyte and don't understand it all. Go ahead.
Oh, it's always good to hear it all again and again from you, to really impress it all. And I appreciate you always there to answer questions and to record this. So go ahead, AA6DD, K6YYL.
Okay, very good. So we see that the time period, let me back up a second here. maximum MUF in general for the upper HF bands. The other peak, of course, is in November. November is noted for the peak of maximal usable frequencies on the upper HF bands throughout that entire month, and that's really when we get to no matter what where the sunspot cycle is. If the sunspot cycle is quite high, of course, November you can go all the way up to 6 meters working into Japan or into Europe or something. If we have a solar flux that is 300 or more, and you're in November, but we're so far away from that, and who knows if it'll ever get back up there, but it could, and it can. So each cycle is really on its own. Nobody can really predict the solar cycles yet. Only after we see the rise, in other words, we'll be going through the bottom over the next year, and then once we have no sunspots for a month or two, and we start climbing out of it, and we go a year from then, we can kind of look at the slope, and only when we can look at the slope of the beginning of the sunspot cycle can you make a kind of reasonable scientific estimate of what the peak might be. Other than that, all the predictions that have ever been done by anyone has always been wrong. And even the solar scientists with PhDs, they make all these wonderful predictions, and they're always wrong. I've made such predictions that have been wrong. Okay, so it's not it's not abnormal. But when you make a prediction about it, you have to put in a whole bunch of exceptions to make yourself right. So when you're wrong, then you have excuses, of course. So don't listen to anyone who says, "Oh, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be horrible forever." Blah 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 blah. They don't know, and I don't care how much degrees they have behind their names. They don't know. Someday, maybe we'll be able to have computer models of the dynamics of the sun and be able to predict it, but we're a long ways away from that. It's a tremendously noisy system. Okay, scientifically speaking, the sunspot cycle is terribly, terribly noisy. So much that you just cannot predict the actual cycle itself. You can predict that it's going to be about 11 years long. You can predict when it's going to have peak out, but you can't really predict what the peak will be, or if it's going to be a 2-hump cycle or a single hump cycle, and so forth and so on. So now that we've said that, any questions on that? I want to get back to the equinoxes here. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, AA6DD, K6YYL.
Alrighty. Looking at the idea that, therefore, the best DX for the northern hemisphere on like 15 meters, 12 meters, 10 meters is in November of any time during the year. That's the best month for those bands working into those areas of the world. The best month for working on those bands into South America, Central America, and New Zealand, Australia is actually February. That doesn't mean that you can't work into Europe and all that just like you can in November. You can if it's good enough. But there is a slight difference between those two peaks. Remember I said you have the February peak of MUF on the higher HF bands, and you have a November peak. Those 2 months are the best months of the entire year. But there's a slight bias that makes the November peak better for Northern Hemisphere DX and the February peak better for Southern Hemisphere DX. So it's good to be aware of that. Now let's look at the summertime, though. When we pass the equinoxes in March, what's going to happen? Well, the days will get longer. The MUF will drop and not get as high, but the daylight is more, which means all the bands 20 meters and 17 meters will be open more because the daylight is longer. Now the long-haul DX on 40 will get less. In other words, I won't have the interference from Europe and Africa as much often, but my local communications, northern hemisphere communications, will get better because I will have more and more sunlight, more and more ultraviolet light, and therefore a longer stretch of propagation, that many more hours of openings for North America on 40. Same thing on 20. So you see, as the days get longer and longer, the MUF goes into a longer period of time. Now, something that you have not really experienced, Kim, and I'll tell you about it now, because you've only gone through a relatively low sunspot cycle of 85 that you experienced the last cycle. Let me turn it back to you for a second, see if you've got any questions, and then I want to go into that a little bit. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're on a roll. AA6DD, K6YYL.
Okay. What happens that you have not experienced, and anyone who's been a ham for less than about, 20 years now would not have experienced, is if the sunset cycle, the next one, rises up above 100, a smooth number, then in the summer months, and this is spring and fall, when we pass the equinoxes, there'll be enough sunlight that the MUF will not die when the sun goes down. Right now, 20 meters dies at 4 o'clock. The sun goes down at 4 o'clock, and 20 goes out. It goes away. And 40 becomes really long. All of a sudden, you're hearing, Radio Beijing come in from China, and all that across the spectrum there, because it's so long. But working locally, if I'm trying to bounce from here to Las Vegas or Nevada or Arizona or Northern California, I don't get anything because it's so terribly long that the band is really faded out for me. And the same thing when it comes up in the morning. Well, what happens when the sunspot cycle gets above 100 in general is that the MUF builds all day long in the spring and in the fall and in the summer, so that the actual upper atmosphere expands. It thermally expands. So the F layer expands upwards all day, and the ionization is kind of maintained. So you have this long time MUF that is going on 20 and 40 meters. And then the daylight comes, the sun goes down, well, it starts cooling off. And as it cools off, the ionization starts not going away, but maintaining itself, and in some cases actually going up, because those ionized particles are cooling off and they're collapsing and they're condensing back on themselves. And so the actual amount of ionization is increasing faster than it's going away because there's no ultraviolet light. So the conditions that are daytime conditions will continue all the way to midnight before finally the MUF will drop. And that's something for you to look forward to. It's kind of neat when it happens. Because you have these daytime conditions on 40 meters and 20 meters that last until midnight. And then, of course, it doesn't build back up again until the next morning when the sun comes up. So that's something for everybody to look forward to who's never experienced it on the HF bands. And if you're really, really high in the sunspot cycle, in other words, if you have a solar flux, sunspot number averaging 150. Well, believe it or not, the same effects will happen all the way to 10 meters. You can be on 10 meters at midnight and being working F layer across the transcontinental United States. Isn't that amazing, Kim? Go ahead.
Yes, AA6DD, K6YYL, and I wonder if that is what happened to one of the stations that called me at midnight. I just happened to be listening, and he actually called me at midnight here, and I worked him, and he was in Australia, so I'm guessing that maybe, and I can't remember when that was. It was definitely an Australia station.
Yeah, well, that will be transequatorial. That would more than likely, remember I said that the highest MUF tends to have a bias towards February for the southern hemisphere. So I would bet money it was probably in February. It could have been the latter part of January, 1st of March, of course. And there you have the MUF that can peak across the equator, because when you work Australia, you don't bounce on the ocean. You shoot your signal all the way to a hot spot just north of the equator that goes across the equator at 300 miles in the air, hits another hot spot south of the equator, and then plummets down into New Zealand and Australia. And that can peak as late as April. That kind of a peak in the southern hemisphere can actually peak as late as April before that kind of propagation pretty well goes away and you can't do it. So that would be transequatorial. It's always 1.5 times higher than the maximum usable frequency, and that is the mode that we utilize and why we have such wonderful signals out of New Zealand, Australia, Chile, Argentina, and South Africa from time to time on the upper HF bands. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, AA6DD, K6YYL. Yeah, so fun. And yeah, that was a surprising contact at midnight on 10 meters. It was 28,400. And I will probably have to look back in my logbooks to see what date that was, but you're probably right about the timing. So I had told that one ham, I said, hey, give me a call anytime. You never know, I may be listening. And I was that night. I was really surprised. So go ahead. Very interesting. Well, go ahead. AA6DD, K6YYL.
Okay. Yeah. Now as you mentioned it, Kim, I remember that. And that was, in my opinion, a multiple layer hop, okay? I remember hearing it and everything. It was quite weak. Normal transequatorial can be very, very strong, but it was quite there. Q5, S9, but it wasn't 30 over 9. And what that tells me is that we had, on our end of it, a sporadic cloud out over the Pacific that vented enough to get it into the transequatorial 2 layers. So here again, it would have been a bounce that probably never even hit the Earth. If it did hit the Earth, it hit it at about 1,000 miles towards the southwest and hit the ocean, and then came up, and then there was enough transequatorial ionization on the each side of the equator to then propagate it all the way to New Zealand or Australia that night. At midnight. So that was a case of what we're talking about. It just shows you when you're running modern equipment. In your case, I think you had a couple hundred watts of sideband into a very efficient antenna, which was the Mako 5/8 up some 30 feet off the ground. And of course, you there in Claremont, you have a fairly good shot right into the ocean. So you can see a good 40 miles from your house across the Coyote Hills all the way to the Pacific. In fact, if you got up on your roof, I bet on a clear day, you could probably see Catalina Island. the geographical structure from your location there. So you have you have a real good low launch angle toward New Zealand, Australia. Like I say, superior to mine, my launch angle here where I am, because I go into the Saddleback Range Mountains that are on the surround Orange County, or on the east side of Orange County, and I'm of course on the east side of those mountains. And I don't have as high a good a launch angle that way as you do. So the combination of all those things meant you could do an unusual propagation that night, which was really phenomenal to be able to pull that off. Because the sunspot cycle simply wasn't, it was up there, but not that good for that time period. Go ahead.
Right. So I have about 6 more minutes left to record, so I can also make a part 2, but just keep in mind I probably have 5 more minutes now of video left on my cell phone. Otherwise it's going to turn off in 5 minutes. So and I will load this up, and we can definitely do a part 2 after I load this and take it off the phone. But go ahead.
Okay. So let's recap the ideas we've been talking about. We should be aware of March the 21st, June the 21st, September the 21st, and December the 21st. Because March the 21st is the spring equinox, where we have equal daytime and nighttime, and therefore the propagation has something is affected by that. How much ultraviolet light we get during the daytime. And then June the 21st is our summer solstice, where we have so much daylight that we have a much longer propagation daytime for local, North American communications on 40 meters, and the same thing for North American communications on 20 meters, because we have so much wonderful daylight time frame. And then we get to September the 21st, the equinox there, gives us, I'm getting hoarse, gives us an even day and daytime and even nighttime again, and the same kind of propagation conditions. And then as we leave there, we go into the distance between this September and December the 21st, where the upper HF bands have the highest MUF rises up to 17 meters, 15 meters, and 12 meters, and on occasion all the way to 10 meters, depending on the propagation that's based on the actual amount of energy coming out of the sun. And so we're in the little winter nadir, right now of December the 21st with very little sunlight. The sun way on the horizon, way south of us. And now it'll start crawling back, and the EMF is going to start rising up. So we can see another peak in the total energy coming from the sun in February. And therefore, here again, look forward for 15 meters and 12 meters to start opening up again for us. And on good occasions, when we get some solar storms, it going all the way up to 10 meters. And so that's what we have to look forward to. We'll say 73s and let the voice rest here. K6YYL, AA6DD.
Okay, thank you very much for all that, Will. AA6DD, K6YYL, and when your voice recovers, maybe we'll do a part 2. I'm sure that we could add a few more things, because it's very, very interesting, and I love this. Go ahead.
Okay, Kim, real good. We'll let you finish up there. We're on 50.300 FM talking simplex here in Southern California.
All right, thank you so much, Will. AA6DD, K6YYL.
73s.
73, Will.